Major political parties often run what are known as focus groups, paying research companies to find out what voters are thinking and feeling, and they use that to shape policies, messages and win elections. So we thought if the Prime Minister and the government are listening to these focus groups, why don't we cut out the middleman and just find out what these groups are saying directly? Joining me live now is Director of RedBridge Group, Simon Welsh. Good to see you again, Simon. So the government has had a week to sell its budget. RedBridge Group has been canvassing voter reaction to it. How's it been received from the research that you've been conducting in the past week?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a bit of a stepping off the plane, getting back from the honeymoon moment for the government. I think it's, we talk about that honeymoon period. I think that might be coming to a close around this budget. There's sort of two things that are really sort of sticking in voters' minds. The first is, yep, there's some good stuff around childcare and parental leave. But if you're not in the window that policy really works for directly, that's sort of, yeah, that's nice. That's in the that's nice category. The other thing that's really sticking with people is an absolute fear and anxiety about their energy prices. Those comments about the energy prices going up 30 to 50%, we're getting those numbers quoted back to us in focus groups. That's a sign that people have really latched onto that and are really worried about that sort of cost of living pressure. And they see those energy costs sort of flowing through to their grocery bills, to everything. It sort of, works its way through the economy, all to land on their hip pocket. So they're very, very worried about that. And the great concern for the Labor camp should be they're not being seen to provide a solution to it. So they've raised these anxieties, but not providing a solution to it. So that's a potentially dangerous situation for the government to be in.
If the government splashed around cash to ease cost of living pain, that would just add more debt and potentially add to inflation as well. An interesting question to ask you, I guess, is has COVID changed perceptions on how governments should do things, and whenever there is a crisis, they should just drop money from helicopters? What are your thoughts on that?
It's certainly changed that dynamic of look what they can do when they want to and they have to. So in terms of being able to spend money, debt and deficit worried so much until suddenly it didn't. So we get that, still getting that sort of feedback in the focus group. So there is a kind of a insulation, if you will, for government spending big to get us out of this crisis. People still see this as part of the COVID crisis, part of this sort of terrible 3 years now that we've been going through. So, yep, there is some tolerance around that, and it kind of depends on who your voting base is. So, for Labor's voting base, there is a little bit more insulation around that sort of idea of being able to spend more. If you're going after Liberal voters, then there is a greater concern around debt and how we pay it back and those sorts of things. But the bottom line in all of that is the concern is not around debt per se. The concern is that to recoup that debt, to repay that debt over time, that will end up cutting services. And that's what really makes people worry. Public services in the context of a cost of living crisis become super important. So any idea of cutting to services becomes really problematic.
Well, we've got another interest rate rise predicted today. It's going to be a tough Christmas financially for many Australians. The latest news poll also has a drop in support for Anthony Albanese. As you say, it seems like the government's honeymoon period might be over. When you've been speaking to people, is there a consensus about what the government should do in particular?
Certainly, when it comes to energy prices, there is certainly a bad guy in the room, and that is the energy companies. So they are being, sort of very effectively positioned as the problem in all this. We hear them talk about price gouging. We hear them talking about, taking advantage to export to markets offshore what gas that should be, or coal that should be kept here in Australia. So certainly, there's a lot of talk around domestic reserves. I mean, and that's a sign. When you get a group of just average folk off the street and they're talking about energy domestic reserves in focus groups, that gives you an idea of just how switched on people are to these issues right now, and which is an indication of how worried they are about them. So those sorts of policies, greater government intervention into energy markets, energy supply, those sorts of things. There is definitely an appetite for that, and what we've seen here in Victoria, sort of with Daniel Andrews' public sort of ownership of energy supply, renewable energy supply, speaks right into that. It's clever politics.
Well, it's interesting insights. Thanks so much for that, Simon Welsh there.